Beyond Mordor's black gates lies a world Tolkien left shrouded in mystery, a land of forgotten kings, hidden tribes, and untold stories. They were called the Men of the East, the Easterlings, and though they marched in countless wars, their true tale was left deliberately untold. Why did Tolkien keep their world in shadow? Tonight, we're going to find out. Before we journey further into the story, if you could take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, it would help us bring more tales from Arda to life. Now, let's return to the story. The earliest whispers of the Easterlings, the Men of the East, come from the First Age. They were known to the peoples of Beleriand not as allies, but as shadows on the horizon, outsiders who first crossed into the lands of the Aedain and the Noldor during the war against Morgoth. It is said that in the great battle of Nirnathon-Noediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, many Easterlings sided with Morgoth. Their motivations are lost to history, obscured behind fear, ambition, and perhaps promises of wealth or dominion. Yet one can almost imagine them on the fields of sorrow, banners of strange design catching the pale light of an autumn sun, fighting not for the love of Morgoth, but for reasons that men in the East have always held close to the chest. Even then, their presence shaped the course of history. The betrayal at Nirnath was catastrophic for the free peoples of Beleriand. Elves and men fell in multitudes, and the lands trembled beneath the tide of evil. And yet, the Easterlings remained an enigma. Their tongues, their gods, their customs, Tolkien gives us only fragments, as if to remind us that some lands are not ours to know, but to imagine. Rhûn, then, exists as a land of mystery. Every campaign, every arrow shot from its borders, every army that clashed with Gondor or Rohan carries with it questions Tolkien deliberately left unanswered. What did the Easterlings believe? Who were their heroes? Did they have great kings, or were they bound by chieftains and councils unknown to our histories? The East is a mirror of the imagination, a place where the known history of Arda meets a deliberate and haunting unknown. When Aragorn, King Elisar, led campaigns into the East after the War of the Ring, the annals are deliberately silent. We know he went to secure peace, to quash lingering resistance, and to bring law to lands long shadowed by Mordor's influence. But the details, the kingdoms he encountered, the treasures or trials he faced, the stories of those he met, are left untold. Tolkien's texts close that chapter, leaving the East to the mind's eye. One can almost imagine Aragorn riding across vast plains, beneath unfamiliar stars, negotiating with kings whose names will never be written in the histories of Gondor or Arnor, and yet whose fates shaped the future of the world. Rhûn is not just a place on a map. It is the unknown, the spaces between the lines, the histories that exist but are hidden, the civilizations that once flourished and now survive only in shadow. It is a deliberate gap, an invitation to wonder, to question, to imagine. And so we stand at the edge of the known world, looking eastward, and we ask, what truly lies beyond the lands of Gondor, beyond the great rivers and mountains of the West, in the lands history forgot? As we turn our gaze eastward, the lands of Rhûn begin to emerge, not as maps or measured borders, but as living, breathing places, filled with people whose names we may never know, whose cities and temples are lost to time. These are the lands from which the Easterlings arose, a tapestry of kingdoms and tribes bound by loyalties, rivalries, and traditions alien to the West. Tolkien gives us little, yet even in what is unsaid, there is a pulse of life, a rhythm to their civilizations that we can almost feel. In the Second Age, Sauron's shadow stretched far beyond Mordor. He did not merely conquer with sword, he enticed with promises, whispered in the ears of kings who had never walked the shores of Anduin or the halls of Gondor. Tribes once scattered, perhaps clinging to river valleys or rolling plains, began to organize under banners darkened by his influence. There is a sense that in the East, men moved differently. Their allegiances were not fixed in the stories of Numenor or Arnor, but in codes older than the histories of the West. Perhaps they measured honor in feats unknown to Gondorian eyes. Perhaps they revered gods we will never hear of, their songs echoing across deserts and hills, leaving only the faintest trace upon the wind. It is tempting to imagine the cities of Rhûn, though Tolkien never names them. Palaces carved from stone like those of Gondor, yet adorned with unfamiliar motifs. Temples whose spires reach toward the sky, bearing the sigils of faiths unseen in the West. Markets alive with colors, smells, and languages strange to the ears of any traveler from Minas Tirith or Edoras. Children running through cobbled streets, mothers calling them back, and scholars in quiet chambers writing in scripts no Western scribe could decipher. All lives unfolding in the shadow of distant mountains, unseen yet entirely real. And yet, in these glimpses of the East, there is also caution. For centuries, the Easterlings had been swayed, sometimes willingly, sometimes coerced, into Sauron's schemes. Their armies would march in the Third Age not as mere pawns, but as men with their own honor, pride, and reasons. Tolkien hints that the Easterlings were not uniformly evil. Some may have resisted, some may have been torn between loyalty to their own leaders and the seductive might of Mordor. There is a human complexity in these decisions, a reminder that even in lands unseen, men and women faced choices heavy with consequence. When we see them in the War of the Ring, their presence is both immediate and enigmatic. They come from the east in waves, riders on swift horses, infantry in tight formation, carrying banners the West cannot read. They clash with Gondor and Rohan, yet the histories tell us little of their faces, their speech, or their griefs. And in that silence lies a story of its own, of a culture so removed, so deliberately obscured, that even the chroniclers of Middle-earth cannot comprehend its depths. Perhaps they sang of ancestors who had walked with the first kings of the East, or lamented lost cities swallowed by the sands of time. Perhaps their children grew up hearing tales of lands to the east that no Westerner would ever see.
This is the essence of Rhûn, a land both present and absent, real and imagined. Its rivers may have flowed, its forests may have rustled with wind, its plains may have seen horses thunder in the twilight. And yet, because Tolkien chose to leave it blank, it lives as a place of infinite possibility. In the East, we see not just the armies of men, but the lives that history forgot, the laughter of children, the counsel of kings, the whispers of lovers beneath strange stars. Rhûn is the unknown, the untold, the space where myth and memory converge, inviting us to wonder what stories linger in lands history left unrecorded. After the War of the Ring, when the great shadow of Mordor had been cast down, King Elessar turned his gaze eastward. Gondor had survived, Arnor had been restored, and peace had begun to take root in the west. But beyond the known rivers, beyond the familiar forests and mountains, there lay lands that had been long shaped by the shadow of Sauron. The East had not forgotten him, nor the sway he held over kings and tribes. It was into this world, vast and unmapped, that Aragorn rode, not as a conqueror, but as a sovereign seeking peace, justice, and the thread of law that would bind the fractured world together. The texts are silent about much of what he found. We are told only that the lands of Rhûn were brought under his influence, that lingering threats of unrest were quelled, and that he secured alliances that ensured Mordor would never rise again. But Tolkien offers no chronicles of the cities he entered, the palaces he beheld, or the kings who bowed, albeit reluctantly, to his authority. We must imagine them, courts where translators murmured between languages unknown, corridors lined with banners of unfamiliar sigils, halls where the flicker of torchlight revealed tapestries of victories we will never read of in the West. One can picture Aragorn moving through these kingdoms with the same balance he had always held: strength tempered by wisdom, authority tempered by understanding. He negotiated not with arrogance but with respect, for these were men whose lands had never been touched by Númenórean influence, whose cultures had grown in ways both alien and enduring. Perhaps he met kings who traced their lineages back to the earliest Easterlings, men whose ancestors had ridden alongside Morgoth, or who had built empires in the shadows of forgotten mountains. And yet, whatever agreements were reached, whatever alliances were forged, Tolkien leaves them unrecorded. Their stories exist only in the spaces between his words, in the imagination of those who wonder what it meant to stand in those courts under alien suns. The campaigns themselves, though largely invisible to the histories of the West, must have been vast. Cavalry across endless plains, scouts moving through dense forests, emissaries speaking in dialects that the men of Gondor could barely grasp. Each city, each tribe, each river crossing would have brought decisions heavy with consequence. Did a ruler bend to Aragorn willingly, or with quiet reluctance? Did villages welcome the return of peace, or did fear of reprisal linger in the shadows? These are questions Tolkien leaves intentionally unanswered, allowing the East to remain not merely a place, but a story unfinished, a realm of possibilities that flickers at the edge of imagination. And so Rhûn becomes more than geography. It is the unknown as a living entity, a land where history and myth overlap, where civilizations rise and fall beyond the chronicler's reach. The Easterlings were not faceless hordes. They were men with homes, with gods, with ambitions and grievances, whose lives intertwined with the great events of Arda, yet remained largely unseen. The mystery of their faith, their languages, their customs, all of this is a deliberate void. Tolkien knew that some stories must remain untold, that some lands must be glimpsed only in whispers and shadows, so that the mind of the reader can roam freely across the empty spaces of his world.
Even after peace was secured, the East did not vanish. The kingdoms of Rhûn endured, rebuilt or reshaped under new kings, perhaps learning the ways of diplomacy and law while holding fast to traditions older than Gondor's memory. The lands were now, in theory, safe from the lingering echoes of Mordor, yet the sense of the unknown remained. Travelers might still glimpse horsemen on distant plains, hear songs carried by the wind from cities whose names are lost, or see towers rising in valleys no Westerner could name. In these fleeting moments, the East reminds us that history is always partial, that some stories are intentionally left for imagination, that even in a world as meticulously chronicled as Middle-earth, mystery has its place. Rhûn, therefore, is a land both present and absent, real and imagined. It is a place where the consequences of the First Age echo, where the influence of the Second Age lingers, and where the actions of the Third Age, from the armies that marched in the War of the Ring to the campaigns of Aragorn, leave tantalizing gaps. The unknown kingdoms of the East are a mirror of possibility, a challenge to our curiosity, a realm where Tolkien's silence is as meaningful as his words. To stand at the edge of Rhûn is to confront the vastness of history itself, to recognize that not all stories are written down, and that some lands, deliberately, are left to the imagination of those who dare to wander beyond the maps of the West. To speak of the Easterlings is often to speak in shadows. The histories of the West reduce them to armies, to banners in the distance, to numbers on a battlefield. But Tolkien gives us enough to imagine that these were not faceless men. Each soldier in those ranks had a story, a family waiting by the hearth,
a father who had taught him to wield a spear, a sister who had prayed to gods whose names we will never know. They were men and women bound by loyalty to their kin, their chiefs, their lands, yet caught in the tides of powers far greater than themselves. During the War of the Ring, Easterling armies marched alongside Mordor's forces. Their spears struck the fields of Gondor, their cavalry thundered across the Pelennor like dark waves. And yet, behind every sword and shield, there was choice. Some may have marched out of fear, others out of promise of wealth, glory, or revenge for wrongs forgotten by the West. Tolkien never tells us their names, yet we can imagine the hesitation of a young warrior at the edge of Minas Tirith, feeling the weight of history pressing down, the pull of Sauron's power against the quiet voice of conscience. In these glimpses, the East becomes heartbreakingly human. Perhaps an Easterling father taught his son to fight, not to conquer, but to protect their own village from rival tribes. Perhaps mothers whispered legends of ancestors who once fought beside Morgoth, not as monsters, but as men with hope and fear alike. Every arrow loosed, every march undertaken, carried with it decisions that would ripple across generations. The West remembers only their battles, their alignment with Mordor. Yet in the East, lives went on. Children grew up, stories were told, songs were sung, and in that continuity, we sense the pulse of civilization, alive even under shadow.
Culturally, Rhûn was a mosaic. Tolkien hints at kingdoms and tribal confederations, at rulers whose courts must have mirrored, in form if not in style, the great halls of men elsewhere in Middle-earth. Perhaps they had scribes recording history in scripts unknown to the West, artisans crafting weapons and armor with intricate designs, priests offering sacrifices to gods unspoken in Gondor. Even the air of their cities, filled with scents of spices, the clatter of markets, and the rhythms of festivals, would have been foreign to any Westerner. Yet we glimpse it only through the faintest brushstrokes. A merchant calling his wares, a child's laughter on a stone street, a king conferring with his council beneath unfamiliar banners. There is tragedy here too. For many Easterlings, the shadow of Sauron was not merely political, it was personal. Loyalties were tested, families torn apart by war, villages burned, and lives consumed in campaigns they may have neither begun nor fully understood. Tolkien leaves these stories untold, but the imagination fills the void with the weight of their choices, the anguish of those caught between duty, fear, and hope. The West may have counted their losses as mere casualties, but in the East, each loss was a world unto itself, a life, a family, a legacy disrupted. Even in the aftermath of the war, the Easterling story continues, unseen but alive. When Aragorn moved eastward to secure peace, some may have welcomed his rule as a shield against chaos. Others may have bristled at the presence of a king who was not of their blood. Yet all were forced to reckon with the new order. Tolkien's silence here is deliberate. He leaves the human side of conquest and reconciliation to the imagination, reminding us that history is never solely about kings and armies, but about the lives lived in between. Rhûn, then, is more than mystery or map. It is the humanity hidden in the margins of history, lives shaped by choice, chance, and circumstance, moments of courage and fear, love and loss, ambition and regret. In imagining their cities, their rituals, their families, we begin to see the East not as a threat, but a mirror. A reminder that even in lands forgotten by the chroniclers of the West, life persisted, stories unfolded, and the pulse of civilization beat with the same fragile, stubborn rhythm that runs through all of Arda. Rhûn exists in the margins of history, in the silences Tolkien left behind, in the spaces where maps fade into uncharted lands. It is a reminder that not all stories are meant to be written, that some civilizations are deliberately veiled, their names, their cities, their faiths left for imagination alone. The East is not absent from Middle-earth. It is a deliberate gap,
a canvas upon which the mind may wander freely, filling in the textures of life with wonder and speculation. The legacy of the Easterlings is intertwined with this silence. In the West, they are remembered largely as adversaries, as armies aligned with Mordor, yet even this is only a fragment of their truth. Their civilizations endured, evolved, and, in some ways, survived unrecorded. Every village that welcomed the dawn after a long winter, every festival of light and song, every family tracing its lineage through generations untouched by Gondor's chronicles, these are the living legacies that Tolkien allows us to sense but never fully see. After Aragorn's campaigns, Rhûn became more than a land of shadows. Peace took root, alliances were formed, and kingdoms may have flourished in quiet ways. Yet Tolkien never tells us the details, and perhaps that is precisely the point. The East, in its enduring mystery, reminds us that history is not only what is recorded, but also what is left unspoken. The very absence of detail makes the East real in a way that rigid description cannot. For in imagining the unknown, we give it life. We see the spires of cities rising in distant plains, hear the music of unknown languages, sense the complexity of societies that Western chroniclers could never capture. Rhûn's mystery also challenges our perception of good and evil. The Easterlings were often aligned with Mordor, yet Tolkien hints at nuance, that even in the service of darkness, men acted from fear, survival, or ancient loyalties. Their choices were human, their motives layered, their lives real. This complexity invites empathy, even when their swords were raised against the West. In this way, the East becomes a mirror, reflecting the universal truths of Arda, that men are shaped by history, by culture, by circumstance, and that even in lands forgotten by the West, life pulses with meaning, courage, and heartbreak. Perhaps the greatest gift of Tolkien's deliberate silence is this: it ignites curiosity. It draws us into a land beyond maps, beyond chronicles, a land where the imagination must do the work that history leaves undone. Rhûn is not a place to be conquered in the mind, but to be explored, speculated upon, and felt. Every unanswered question, the names of kings, the songs of the people, the shape of their cities, becomes an invitation to wonder, to fill the world with our own interpretations, guided by the textures and glimpses Tolkien provides. In the end, the lost civilizations of Rhûn teach us something profound about storytelling itself. Not all histories can be captured, not all lives can be fully known. Some stories exist in shadow, some in silence, and some between the lines. These are the lands that spark imagination, that remind us of the vastness of the world Tolkien created, and of the infinite possibilities that lie beyond the boundaries of recorded history. To gaze eastward is to confront both the unknown and the eternal human desire to understand it, to walk in lands that exist as much in thought and wonder as in stone and river. Rhûn, then, is not merely a land of men and kingdoms. It is the realm of the untold, the unrecorded, the lives that persist in silence yet resonate across time. In exploring it, we honor not only the Easterlings, but the very nature of imagination itself, where history's gaps become gateways to myth, and where mystery endures as the most profound gift of all. As we stand at the edge of the known world, looking eastward across rivers and plains that few Western eyes have seen, we are confronted by Rhûn, a land as real in imagination as it is absent from our histories. It is a realm where choices ripple unseen, where civilizations flourish beyond record, and where the pulse of human life beats quietly, persistently, in shadows. To speak of Rhûn is to speak of what Tolkien left unsaid, to acknowledge that the greatest stories sometimes exist not in text, but in the spaces between, where curiosity and wonder take hold. The history of the Easterlings is a mosaic of glimpses and absences. In the First Age, their betrayal at Nirnaeth Arnoed shaped the course of wars they could scarcely have imagined. In the Second Age, their kings bent to the shadow of Sauron, their lands drawn into alliances and pacts that would echo through centuries. In the Third Age, they marched in armies across the plains of Gondor, their banners dark against the sun. Yet behind every sword was a life, a story, a hope that the West could never fully know. And after the war, when Aragorn rode into the East, he brought peace to lands and people whose histories are left deliberately incomplete, reminding us that not all victories are written and not all kingdoms are chronicled. Yet perhaps the truest power of Rhûn lies in its mystery. Tolkien's silence is not neglect, it is invitation. It is the recognition that some lands belong as much to imagination as to history, that some civilizations are defined not by what we see, but by what we wonder about. We feel the rhythm of their lives in every whisper of the wind across the plains, in the distant thunder of hooves we will never see, in the songs of ancestors we will never hear. Every unanswered question becomes a spark. What did their cities look like? Who were their heroes? What gods did they pray to? What tales did their children tell?
In this way, Rhûn is timeless. It exists across ages, beyond the battles and kings, beyond the campaigns and the chronicles. It is the East of imagination, a reminder that the world Tolkien created is larger than any story told, that the unknown is as vital as the known, that mystery itself is a gift. To contemplate Rhûn is to honor the lives of the Easterlings, not merely as warriors, but as men and women, as families, as civilizations that lived, dreamed, struggled, and endured beyond the gaze of the West. And so, as our journey draws to a close, we leave Rhûn not with answers, but with wonder. We leave its plains and rivers, its courts and cities unseen, yet vividly alive in the mind. We leave knowing that history is not a closed book, that some stories exist in shadow and imagination, and that the lost civilizations of the East are as compelling for what we cannot know as for what we can glimpse. Rhûn is the story history forgot, yet it is also the story we are invited to imagine. It is a reminder that Middle-earth is vast, intricate, and infinitely mysterious, that even in silence there is life, and even in absence there is story. And as we turn back toward the lands of the West, carrying the echoes of unknown cities, distant banners, and the human pulse that flows across the East, we are reminded that the world Tolkien built is not only a record of battles and kings, but a place where imagination walks hand in hand with history, and where the lost and mysterious civilizations of Rhûn live forever in our minds. So, who were the men of the East? Were they villains, victims, or something more? We may never know, and that's the point. Tolkien gave us the gift of mystery. He showed us that for every tale told, there must be stories left untold. And in those silences, the world feels real. The East remains hidden, waiting, beyond the Sea of Rhûn. And if you've enjoyed this journey into the unknown corners of Middle-earth, there's more to uncover. Because next time, we'll ask, what really became of the blue wizards who vanished into the East? Don't miss it. Subscribe, join the fellowship, and let's keep wandering into the shadows together.